This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.
All right, so now that we have everybody, I'm going to call this meeting to order. We'll roll call in
and start the recording.
What?
Then start the recording. I can't do it on my end.
Okay. I can't either.
Who's our
host? Let me check.
I thought last time it was me who got it.
Done.
Yay.
Right? Yes.
Good catch, Megan. Good catch. Okay, we'll start with the mayor.
Mayor LaChapelle here.
Megan?
Megan Harvey here.
Maren?
Aaron Goldstein here.
Sam? Ben?
Ben Hersey here.
Laura?
Laura Scott present.
And Cindy Kwasinski present. So the first announcement I want to make is one for of my own before we go on to any other announcements and correspondence and gifts. So this to the public. As some of you know, my family has been facing a very serious health crisis that began shortly after the last election. I was able to balance committee work with caring for my family and working full time. But this year is going to be harder than last year. So I've made the hard decision that I will not run for a term this coming November. I've loved working here. I've loved the committee, and I'm proud of the work that we've done. I trust the remaining members and the mayor completely, so I know that the district is in good hands. This is a very difficult position. But it's important work.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me? Okay. And rewarding. I will miss it greatly. I will be serving for the rest of the year, and I look forward to seeing who fills my position. That's it. So, all right. Megan, do we have correspondence? And do we have gifts?
I have no correspondence to report and no gifts.
Okay. All right. Okay, so we are now going to open this up to public comment. Everybody who would like to talk, please signal as soon as you can and keep it to 3 minutes. And if you can, please state your name. So I will scroll through. I don't see anybody indicating that they want to talk right now. Give it another minute. Okay. All right. I'm going to close public speak if no one wants to talk in about 30 seconds. Okay. All right, checking last time. I don't see anybody indicating that they want to speak. So we are going to close public speak right now. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we have a lot of feedback.
I think there's someone who's joined as a phone number. They can mute themselves.
Let me look.
I'm not able to mute them here. 413 area code.
Yep. Yep.
Or if the host can mute them. I don't have that capability. You're welcome to
Can you mute that? Can you mute that phone number? It's 413 and the ends in 06. That's where we're getting all the feedback.
It seems to have worked itself out now anyway. So maybe just talking about it made the feedback go away. No.
Right, but they're still open. So whoever's on the phone with 06, if you could please mute yourself, and Mayor, if you can do that. Again, that's one of those, usually I can do that. But you have recording abilities, so you would also have the ability to mute. So now you made me co-host. I should be able to do it. Yay, there we go. Thank you. That was easy. All right, we're done. Okay, thank you, Mayor. So now we have two items that Superintendent Menendez is going to bring us through for school committee discussion. So I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Menendez.
Can you hear me? You can't hear me? Okay, so hold on.
I
You
wonder
have
if the echo is because, Dr. Brenda, I think you're on the call twice.
Okay. So when I get off, let me get off this one. To get off this. Can you hear me on this one?
Yes, you can.
Also, okay, also, Sue said she was kicked off. Can you see her? Is she back on?
I will check.
Yes, she's
Yes,
back.
I'm back on. Oh, perfect. School committee, okay. So the first one was on the Thrive Act, which is basically the act that says that they want school committees to accept signing on the Thrive Act. It basically says that they don't want to keep the MCAS as a graduation requirement. So part of that states that each district would probably have the possibility of deciding on what they wanted to have for their graduation requirement for the district. It's not exactly completely worked out yet, for sure. But what they basically are saying is that they want to be able to go and state that one test, and they're talking about the MCAS, should be the only way of determining graduation requirements. So they're asking school committees really across the state if they want to take a vote on that.
So as a special ed teacher at a high school, I take my students through the MCAS at 10th grade each and every year. It is very stressful. It's terrifying for students, regular ed and special ed, who have worked so hard to learn, and then they take a high pressure test. I have always felt that your graduation should not rest on passing the MCAS. The purpose of the MCAS to me is to give information to the district as to how well our students are doing. And if you were to get that information and use it to alter your teaching, that makes a lot of sense to me. It has never made sense to me that we make students risk not getting their diploma. I have seen students struggle, intelligent, great, creative students struggle to pass that test because it's so anxiety producing at 10th grade. I mean, you know that it's now, or you keep repeating, or you don't graduate. So I am all for jumping on board this act and having school districts decide what the requirements are for graduation, which I think teachers and administrators and school committees will do an excellent job of deciding. Anybody else? Mayor? Sorry. Sam, go ahead.
Go ahead.
You were breaking up and I didn't catch it.
Sometimes you turn off your video, it'll help.
No, Sam, you're still breaking up. Let's start with the mayor while you are trying to figure that out, and we'll try again in a few seconds. Mayor?
Yeah, so I certainly support your position, Cindy, as an educator and just giving, options to the individual school district. I also think it'll give us some freedom around curriculum and what's appropriate, but also what's available to Easthampton students because they're in Easthampton. And I think about the fabrication shop in the high school and building a stronger program to the machine shops that fabricate in town, like instantly. My understanding of the Thrive Act is, or if we were to vote in favor of this, that it does not negate the need to go for, or the strong recommendation go for accreditation that we do now, that it's two different things. It's not that if we were to do something other than MCAS, we would still be available and would go for accreditation, the 4-year accreditation cycle that we do now. Is that correct?
That's my understanding. Superintendent Benenda, you're muted, but do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, so that's a totally separate process. So
Okay.
that would have nothing to do with that. So the NEASC evaluation, I believe, is what Mayor you're speaking about. That would be
Yes.
yeah, totally separate. This is just totally to do with the MCAS. So I think the complication in it is that the federal government, federal Board of Education, does require that every state have some assessment that they use throughout the state in order to prove what are the levels and the success of the students that are in the schools. So we do, it's not like we're going to be saying that we're going to take away the MCAS and do nothing. You can't do that because you would risk losing lots of federal funding from education. So it does have to have something else. And there's a lot of, some of the controversy over each district deciding on what they want to have is, how do we know that we are consistent in Massachusetts of expecting the same requirements from every student? So, for example, there is movement, of students from one district to another. And so there would need to be some type of way of knowing that consistent expectations for graduation requirements existed.
So our vote doesn't necessarily what the district will do for the next school year. It's just that we're in support of the act.
Yes, I think it appears this is like the beginning stages of having this discussion.
Great. Thank you very much.
That's my understanding, is that, we're just starting this. But again, I have no problem with the MCAS in itself. I just have a big problem with it being so high stakes and so devastating to some students. Sam, are you able to do that now? I'm going to mute myself.
Does this sound better?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
I think it was actually my speakers. So I have you guys turned down very quiet. So if you try to interrupt me, I won't be able to hear you. So somebody figure out a way to throw virtual tomatoes at me or whatever. I'm on board with everything that's been said here. I think this is a really good opportunity for us. I like the fact that it's not just our district, that other districts have signed on to this. Northampton has signed on to this. I've heard from a lot of members of the community, not only now, but also when I served on the school committee prior, that this was a big concern, and this high stakes graduation requirement was like not consistent with the values of our district as a whole, both the values of our families and the values of our district. So I think that's really important. I do think I just want to highlight an issue that I worry gets left aside in this discussion, which is that in some districts, and this does not apply to our district as far as I know, but in some districts there is it is very difficult for students over the age of 18 to receive transition services, students with disabilities who require transition services between ages 18 and 22. It's difficult for them to get those services if they pass the MCAS and essentially meet the graduation requirements. There are some kids who have disabilities such that they require transition services even if they're meeting graduation requirements in other ways. Our district, from what I've heard from families in the district who have gone through that process, and from my experience in the district, has been our district has not had a problem with that. Like, we're pretty good at assessing students individually and making sure that students who are entitled to transition services are receiving them, regardless of whether or not they pass the MCAS in 10th grade. But I do think, and this is just drawing on my experience outside of school committee in my work, we saw a lot of kids during COVID when that MCAS waiver happened. Desi specifically said this wasn't supposed to happen, but we saw a lot of kids who did not receive those entitlement services between 18 and 22 because the district said, oh, well, we've waived the MCAS requirement. So because of that, you meet the requirements for graduation. You no longer are entitled to transition services. So I'm excited about this from like an exploratory perspective. I want to really make sure that we don't lose that very small but very important group of students who I think often gets lost in these conversations. But I'm really enthusiastic about it, and I thank the folks in the community who brought it to our attention, and I'm really glad that we're able to discuss it now.
Thank you. Laura? Laura, you're muted.
There we go. I'm glad Sam's speaker was working. I was going to try to allude to that, but you can speak to it much more eloquently than I can. I want to second what everybody is saying. I think the sooner we can do away with the MCAS as a graduation requirement, the better. I think we functioned very well without it. I think when you talk about holistic learning and diversity of learners, that if a child can achieve earning the requisite amount of credits, attending, and doing all sorts of additional activities, that should certainly speak much higher than a single series of tests. I will go a step further than Cindy in saying I'm dubious about the utility of the data that we collect from MCAS, but that is probably a conversation for the future. I think this is a really important first step. We'd be foolish not to say, absolutely, we set our own graduation requirements. And I want to highlight too what Superintendent Benenda pointed out, and just say, we certainly had children were moving from district to district in a time before MCAS was a graduation requirement. So I think we can revisit kind of the standardized, much like a 4-year or a 2-year degree would have some standardized general ed credits, and just making sure, we'll take a look at what we offer and make sure there's not holes or anything we need to do to realign in the years coming forward if this is successful, removing this as a requirement.
Thank you. Ben?
This is an easy one for me. I'm just in agreement with what's going on and what we're talking about. I was curious, there is talk about like a ballot question in 24 around this issue. I don't know what that looks like, or if anyone has any info on that, but would that do the same thing in terms of what you're saying, Superintendent Benenda, making it that we still have to have a kind of exit something, but not necessarily MCAS?
You're muted.
Here I am. So basically, I think the reason for asking school committees to sign on is to have that ballot question. And interesting enough, the lead sponsors on this legislation agenda One of them is actually Senator Joe Comerford from Northampton and Senator Adam Gomez from Springfield. So both of those are pretty local people asking for this change. So I believe the word was it is going to be on the ballot, and you have to get so many signatures for that to occur. So I think that is where it is definitely going from there. The other part of it that I think is important that you might want to know is that it also eliminates state receiverships. And it really reinstates the democratic control to the community and to the school committees. That's a very, important part of it.
I can't take, yep.
And then the last part of it too is that they are going to establish a commission that is going to work to establish a new whole child system of assessing schools. And and then this can be implemented in the coming years. So it does actually also show, some of the MCAS testing results did really, what they say, punish and some students, right? And this would put really true learning front and center for communities, so they get more conversation on, what they see as what's important for students to achieve and graduate.
That, for me, that's very exciting. I want to see that happen. I want us as a community to have that conversation. I think it's massively one of 8 states left that does this. People realize that it's time to move on. So for me, this is a no-brainer. Let's do it.
And I'm not surprised to see that leadership on this issue coming from Western Mass. We get things done out here.
Also, did you know that the MCAS is 30 years old?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh yeah, I remember.
Yep.
Marin?
Yeah, 30 years old, and there's plenty of issues that's been raised with it. So again, I think this isn't about getting rid of the federal requirements of, statewide testing or, and hopefully the work that will be done in the future on correcting a lot of those issues and balancing it better in our state. But it is about us sort of being able to know that our students are, when and if they're eligible to graduate. So I certainly agree with this as well. And unless there's more conversation, would be willing to put forward a motion.
Megan, there you are.
I just wanted to, for the record, thank you all for these great points of view. 100% support us signing on to this to support the Thrive Act. It's what our community members have told us over the past 2 years that I've been here. And our teachers have also told us, our educators and staff members. And so, again, no brainer. Just wanted to make sure that's out there. I'm ready for a motion.
Go ahead, Marin.
So I would make a motion that we, as the Easthampton School Committee, approve and support the Thrive Act, so that we remove MCAS from our graduation requirement.
I'll second that.
Okay, any more discussion? Okay, all right, Mayor?
Mayor LaChapelle, yes.
Megan?
Megan Harvey, yes.
Marin?
Maren Goldstein, yes.
Sam?
Sam Hunter, yes.
Ben?
Ben Hersey, yes.
Laura?
Laura Scott, yes.
And Cindy Kuzensky, yes, absolutely. All right, thank you. So the next one, do you want to talk about the Can-Do presentation?
Yes, please. So today I did meet. I had a very nice conversation about Can-Do. Can-Do used to be called the Special Ed Pact. And I believe, Sam, you are co-chair of that.
Yes.
And it's going to be, conversation was wonderful today about all the plans there are to include special education, parents, and students. And understanding, both the IEP process, understanding services, related services, understanding assessment of their children, and really providing many opportunities for parents of children of special needs to get together and to feel supported in the system. So the presentation is going to be in the October meeting. That will be the next time that the presentation. So it was just nice today to have this conversation. And I think it's going to definitely add to the effectiveness of education that is already very effective in Easthampton, but just even add more to that. And I don't know if Sam wanted to add any more.
Yeah, I can. Well, first of all, I did check with the you guys can hear me okay, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm like trying to read everybody's faces. I did check to make sure that there wasn't a conflict of interest with me being a co-chair of Can Do and then also being on school committee. And there is no conflict of interest. But one thing I'm not supposed to do is represent Can Do on the school committee. So I will just say, so most of the school committee's contact is going to be through Kelly Brown, who's the other co-chair, and then Pilar, who's our I don't know exactly what her role is. She does a lot of other stuff. She's going to make fun of me for flubbing that. But yeah, we're very excited. This has been kind of a couple of years worth of work that has been going into this to try to make this a more active group. And I guess the only thing that I would add is that we want to make sure that this is a group that's open to folks who aren't necessarily parents as well. So caregivers, grandparents, people who just have questions, people who are just interested in like being allies to kids with disabilities. And we are hoping to eventually like include more students themselves as well, and to kind of rethink like what a PAC can actually do in a district.
Yeah, and we did try to get it on this meeting, but because of scheduling conflicts and pulling everything together, we were in contact with Kelly Brown, and we decided on October. So it'll either be the October 10th or the October 24th meeting, but it'll be an exciting presentation. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yes.
All right. Anything else, Superintendent Benenda, before we go on to our business portion?
Nope. Thank you very much.
All right, Nick, it's time for you.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, great. So I have a short business report. There's not often a lot to report in the summer. There's a lot going on, but there's not a lot to like report on it until it's all over. I hope you all received the report as well as the personnel reports in your backup. So, okay, good. So our FY23 end of the year has been closed. I've completed the necessary transfers and journal entries that are, required to do that process. I'm just waiting on some final grant and revolving fund data from our city auditor, so I can, do that final reconciliation and as well as use that information to begin my end of the year report for DESE. I'll report more end of the year detail at our finance subcommittee. We have an upcoming meeting in early September, so I'll get into the specifics of the end of the year close there. Our high school was recently awarded a $15,000 grant from the Collaborative for Educational Services to do some nicotine and marijuana prevention work with students there. I'm not completely certain what all that's going to look like. I was just notified of the grant award from, for strict accounting purposes, so the fund can be set up and, folks can be paid the way they ought to be. But, that's a pretty good amount of money to do some education and prevention programming. So congratulations to the high school on that. Our summer food service program came to a close last Friday, August 18th. I will compile some data on the amounts of meals served and the average meals served per day and everything once I have that, as well as the financial pieces of that too. So I feel like by our September meeting, I'll be able to give you a report on that and how the program went this year. I'm currently in the process of gathering the info that I need to prepare my end of year financial report for DESE. The template's ready. I've already got it. It's really not much different from last year's. Once all my data is collected from various stakeholders, I will begin preparing the report, which is due to DESE on Friday, September 29th. So I always look forward to doing that report. Believe it or not, it does take the better part of a month. It's a pretty weighty spreadsheet. Lastly, I have personnel reports for both June and July. In June, you would see 3 new hires, a couple substitute teachers that obviously largely would be working this fall, and a new admin assistant at Mountain View to replace a vacancy that had been there. You'll see, more separations than normal, but that's because it's June and, it's some retirements in there. And, sometimes people may choose to enter a graduate program or, try to get their teacher licensure. So they may not work full time anymore. But, we did have 9 separations in June, including a special ed admin assistant, 3 special ed teachers throughout the district, 2 paraeducators, an occupational therapist, a music teacher, and Dr. LeClaire, the former superintendent. There were no transfers in June. And in terms of vacancies, just because we're still, trying to tie up some loose ends on summer hiring, I'll report that in September. I mean, there are a couple of vacant positions, but there's likely some paperwork sitting in our superintendent's office that's just waiting to be processed. So I wouldn't be able to report with complete accuracy at this time. So we'll save that for September. We had 1 new hire, which would be our new superintendent, Maureen Benenda. We had 5 additional separations. We had an EL teacher, our maintenance mechanic, our director of special education, a student support teacher at Mountain View, and a health teacher at Mountain View. In addition, there were 2 transfers. Our interim IT director took the position permanently, and one of the special ed admin assistants took a full-time role there. You're probably wondering where all the summer hires are. That'll be on the next report because their effective date is August 29th. So that'll be, you'll see that next month when I give the August report. There have been plenty of new hires, though. I think probably around 20 at this point. So those are my personnel and business updates. Does anybody have any questions?
I don't.
Do we have a date for that finance subcommittee meeting? Just for my notes.
No, I'm still working out the final details.
Okay.
It'll be out soon, though.
Okay, thank you.
It's a little vacation time. I haven't got it finalized yet.
No
Yeah.
problem.
So I don't have any questions.
Thank you.
You're always clear. You're always concise. I love it.
Thanks.
All right. So now it's time to talk about student handbooks. And we start with the high school handbook. So I saw Principal Evans on here. There you are. Hello.
Hi.
All right.
So I'm hoping that you have received the correspondence with the things. So would you want me to go through them all, or would you just want me to ask if you have any questions or concerns about any of them?
From my perspective, I like to have us go through the
Sure.
changes just briefly.
Okay. So some of these changes we made, just to clarify some things, and some changes were made through working with our lawyers that work with the district. So I'll try to point out which is which. The first change, adding pregnancy and pregnancy-related conditions to the non-discrimination language that came from our lawyers. The second change, changing number 2 on page 14, change the consequence for being tardy. So the part that has the strike through was a very scripted and pre-scripted and very constricting way of dealing with students who have who are consistently late to school. So what we did was change the language to be more flexible for us to work more individually with students and parents and caregivers, and not try to treat everybody with the same formula. We didn't find that to be effective, and it's a very difficult task to track it, and figuring out the 6th, the 3rd, the 9th, and so on and so forth took up a lot of time and didn't really have a big impact. So the change there is to allow the assistant principal and myself to work more individually with parents and students to come up with plans that will help students be on time.
Can I ask a question? And I'm not sure how much leeway you have with this, but as a teacher in another district that relies very heavily on school of choice students, I noticed that it is the school of choice students who are usually paying the price of detention because they were a couple of minutes late for school. They're traveling from other towns, other cities. They get caught up in, construction or have to detour, and they're constantly having to justify being late by a few minutes. And so one of the things I've always hoped for is that we make some sort of, and that may be part of this piece where you're conferencing with the students. But I really think that if we're going to ask for school of choice dollars and we're going to ask high school students to drive themselves in and drive their siblings in often, that it's important that we make some sort of small accommodation to them, because there are going to be times where they're late, not because they didn't leave for their house on time. So I was just wondering where that might fit in, and have you thought about that? Because that's usually when I'm serving, when I'm, holding a detention, because we rotate. I find most of my kids are school of choice kids who have just been a few minutes late a number of times.
So I appreciate that input, Cynthia. And I think that it is not as prevalent a problem at Easthampton as you're describing in your district. Right. But nonetheless, you will note, this is a not changed language, but at the bottom of this section, just before number 3, it lists the acceptable excuses for being late to school include documented medical appointments, documented court appearance, town emergency, or weather extremes. So town emergency is the kind of thing where there was a traffic jam that I couldn't avoid because I was coming over the mountain from Holyoke or something like that. And I agree with you that changing it to this language really allows for more flexibility for those kinds of situations where compassion is called for more than just, well, this is what the handbook says.
Right.
So thank you for that. Yeah.
So as long as that falls within that town emergency and weather extreme, I love it. I think that's great. And I like the lighter, more collaborative change.
Thank you. The next item is updated language regarding tobacco and nicotine delivery devices. So what everybody knows as vapes is no longer called e-cigarettes and Juuls. So you'll note that's just that we're updating the language there to reflect the current language that is used in the culture. So that's really what most of that is. The next one was wheeled devices. And I think there was a time when this was very important. It is not this time. The first, second, and third offense for students using wheeled devices, I don't think that's, so it was really just taking that language out because it really is sort of arcane at this point. Students don't use wheelies or heelys anymore. We did leave in the initial language just saying, hey, don't you can't ride your skateboard through this hall and put it away, or keep it in the office, which most kids is exactly what happens. But really, we didn't need all that other. Number 5 is really probably the most important and significant change. This was added by the lawyers. It is the language coming from the law that was passed last November. So it really speaks about alternative remedies for suspension. And this is a statewide law that needed to make its way into the handbook. So there it is. It's exactly how the lawyers presented it for us. Number 6 is just something that I think sort of consistent with your conversation earlier today. There was a place in the handbook that stated that refusing to take the MCAS exam was grounds for short-term external suspension. That's not how we would handle a refusal to take MCAS. It's not a discipline issue. It might be a freedom of speech issue. It certainly is not an issue that comes up very often. I don't think it's ever come up where a student just said, I refuse. There are plenty of times when students don't take it, but they usually take a makeup. That just didn't belong in our handbook, I felt. So we're taking that out. This is just some clarity of language on how external suspension impacts attendance. You see the portion that's crossed off is the 10-day credit policy. Well, if you go searching through the handbook for the 10-day credit policy, you're not going to find it. We know what it means, but what it really refers to is the number of unexcused absences that a student can accumulate before they lose credit. But which is 9, after on the 10th one, you lose credit in a class. But that language is more of like, if you know what we're talking about, it makes sense. Otherwise, it's just like, what's the 10-day credit policy? So just a clarification there. The lawyers added alcohol to the list of controlled substances that are grounds for long-term suspension or expulsion. I just feel like that was an oversight at some time. Number 9, and I believe the last one, under the capacity to send a student out of school on emergency removal while we're trying to investigate what happened in a disturbance, or for whatever reason, if we feel like the person's presence in the school presents a potential danger to themselves or others, can ask them to be out of school for 2 days while we investigate, sort out, allow a cooling off period. If that investigation turns into a suspension, we wanted the language in there to say that those 2 days will now be added on as part of the suspension, not so that there's no confusion about whether it should be added on at the end of it. It's just incorporated into it. So that language, we asked the lawyers about that, and they put that language in there. So those are the changes. Are there any other questions for me?
Megan had some.
Yeah, Megan, sorry.
Oh, that's fine. I just wanted to circle back to the updates to the tardy policy.
Sure.
I love having a language in the policy that makes it that you can sort of, use discretion and figure out kind of what makes sense for this particular situation. And I'm going to ask a question about it that in no way I think would be something that necessarily would happen. But whenever I hear a policy like this, I start thinking to myself things like, is there a way that there are extra eyes on it so that it's being the sort of discretion is being applied fairly to all types of students? Regardless of like whether or not this is not regardless of whether or not it's happened in the past, but just, in reality, is it being applied fairly? And then also like the perception of fairness. Both are important to students. So just wanted to see if you had thoughts about like if there
I have.
Is applied or what you were thinking about that.
Yeah. So, I think this is a big part of it. It's a big part of why we're doing it, is to ensure that there's equity, not just in the terms of fairness that everybody gets. So this allows us to respond to individual students and their particular circumstances. School choice is a nice example of that. But there are lots of other circumstances that we need to be able to hear and process before we decide, oh, this is the best response. So when a parent calls and says, I needed the student to take care of their younger sibling because I needed to go to work early or I had to stay to work late, that matters. So the way the policy is now, I think provides equity in terms of we're able to treat people the way they needed to be treated and not everybody with the same blanket policy, which would actually not necessarily be fair to some of our students. So in a way, making it different is fairer, right? So that's the intent there. I think the other part of your question is making sure that we are tracking it consistently. And that's always a challenge because there's X number of people available to do X amount of tasks. And if you're short one day or today's events, precluded certain routines from being able to, that we're always facing that. We're always challenged to make sure that we're consistently enforcing. So I can't say for sure that, we'll always be on top of it because there'll be days when it has to drop down the agenda on the list of priorities. But it's certainly something that we feel strongly about and want to ensure that students feel that their presence at school on time matters and that people are noticing and they're being called in because we care instead of just ignoring them. I think that's the other part of this message is if kids don't show up for 3 or 4 days and nobody says anything when they come back, then they kind of feel like they've been invisible. So we want to avoid that as well.
I think that's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mayor LaChapelle?
Yes, on the 10 days and as far as, the 2-day cooling off period and like during an investigation, if there was no violation or
Right.
pause, do those 2 days count as excused absences?
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked that question.
Okay.
Yeah, and we make that clear at the start of the 2-day. Look, we're sending you home. This is called an emergency removal. If it turns out that there's no culpability here, we're just needing to remove you so that we can spend the time, then yes, those are restored as excused absences.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Laura?
I just want to follow up briefly on some of the kind of hypothetical concerns that Megan raised, if I'm putting that appropriately. I'm wondering, I have utmost faith in Ms. Wilson, so this is not to do with her, but I'm wondering if we might consider that we adjust the policy just slightly to give it to more than just one person. Not that it's Ms. Wilson, but that it states assistant principal. That could we maybe consider something that it would be the assistant principal in conjunction with the guidance counselors? Just thinking that those are folks who may be pretty well acquainted with family issues, difficulties at home, a challenging workload, and also would remove, maybe relieve some of the pressure on any singular individual, to be accused of not administering that discretion fairly.
And just to add on to what Laura just said, even if it's not realistic to do that for every single scenario, because I absolutely understand what you're saying about like days, there's some days where you just don't have the resources for that. Maybe like a monthly review or just check in by multiple eyes. I think it's really important. And again, it's like, Laura, we're not saying that, it wouldn't be done fairly, but then it really helps this perception of like, there are multiple people looking at this. And so it's easier for folks to catch.
Yeah. So there are two distinctions that to be made. First of all, we have a student support team that with the entire school counseling staff and the administrators meet weekly. And for students that are struggling, they might be struggling in the area of being on time. It might be attendance. It might be any number of things. But we use that team to decide, okay, who's the best person, who's got the best connection with this family or with the student to begin the intervention process, right? At the same time, anything that is connected to discipline, we keep a pretty strong firewall between the counseling office and the administration. the counselors are really clear, and they should be, that their role isn't that should not be confused. So we seek their support as an intervention with, hey, the student is really struggling with being on time. What do we know about what's going on at the home? What do we know about the family? Who's connected there? Oh, it's Ms. Sabro, terrific. Ms. Sabro, could you reach out to the family, see if you can get some more information, find out what's going on? Not, Ms. Sabro, would you call and say that we're going to keep them after school, right? That comes from Ms. Wilson or myself. And it can only really come from myself and Ms. Wilson. So we try to make that distinction. That's why it's stated that way in the policy. We don't have a designee that would, like a secretary, administrative assistant, or anybody, but definitely, yes, the counseling office, we team, all the issues that come up with students and work to try to find, who's the best person to do this part of the intervention. I hope that answers your question, Laura.
I don't want to harp on this. I just want to state what my concern is. And it's not with any of the current players on the board. I'm looking at this strictly as a policy, and I'm changing out all the current players for unknown players and saying, how could this policy blow up or not function the way that you're intending? That's, I think, the view that me and Megan are taking. I appreciate your explanation. I don't doubt that that's exactly how it's done. I wish we could add a little language to the policy to explain that that's what's happening behind the scenes before the kind of disciplinary intervention. And understanding it makes perfect sense what you're saying about the assistant principal and principal being disciplinarians and having those boundaries. I support that. But you made mention of like the student support team. I'd love to see a mention of, assistant principal would have some consultation with those folks or something to that effect. Just so that we're making clear how you've realized is the best way to handle this. We are laying that out for whoever may be there in the future to continue that best practice.
That makes some sense. I think, if you wanted to, add another layer of administration, like a dean or someone who, truant officer. I think, because part of what I hear is it's a lot on one person, and it is.
Tell me if I'm wrong, but I think what Laura and Megan are talking about is just adding the words so that it reads, students that are consistently tardy will work with the assistant principal in collaboration with the student support team. I think that's what they were saying. Is that correct?
I hear that. I think I would like some time to sort of play around with that language so that it does not, because we are talking about consequences here.
Yep.
So I think it needs to be consequences / support. Like I want to be really clear about what the various roles would be and what their distinctions are. So I appreciate that suggestion. If the committee would like, I would certainly go back and play around with that, do some wordsmithing to ensure that that's clear, that there's a broader approach here that includes a lot of support that the assistant principal might initiate with the school support team, but that is distinct from when it becomes a discipline issue. So, that's a little clunky what I just said, so I want some time to.
Yeah, I say take all the time to, even if we revisit this again next year, I'm saying if I'm a parent looking at this, it's not clear to me from this specific language that there's more than the assistant principal involved. And clearly there is. So let's codify that so it's better understood, and whoever follows later will, continue to employ that. Sorry, Mayor, I feel like I keep stepping on your toes. I'm done.
It's okay. I get it. So I would just actually disagree respectfully with both Megan and Laura. I think the policy book is exactly that policy, and an assistant principal and principal are well-regarded roles as far as consequences, and that the next step after a policy is a best practice. Currently, our best practice, which is informed by data and research, is a student support team that has a very distinct purpose that can be parallel to consequences or happen without consequences, and that to cross those two streams and workflow is not the, I guess workflow is a better place for it. And I would also, while it's hard to have parents or even school committee members to read all of the documents and processes, I relate my feelings on this to city council, where they will set a policy, they will write an ordinance, but the day-to-day practice and best practice in a given field, in a given department is best led. With that, also, just knowing the data system that we keep in Power School, but also our reporting to DESE, which has just made that dashboard so easy to follow, that I know the principal and assistant principal spend a lot of time, as well as the superintendent, getting all that data to DESE. It's very easy to track top lines, historical, current. I mean, you're turning that data over in quarters. I would also point to the new law that was snuck into the new budget, which finally officially starts tracking ethnicity as well as race, as well as gender and orientation choices as the individual sees fit to describe themselves or not describe themselves. And that's something that's a big deal. Because if you look for ethnicity separate from race, and it's key in our city, but also in our schools, that is a big piece of these separate stories that need to be listened to, but also easily tracked without involving names, or in the current moment, what we all just found out happened, because we know the parent, we know that. So that's my case. And I will put that forward as a former assistant superintendent in charge of discipline and consequences for moderate to severe special education children. So I would appreciate it. So
thank you. Before I call on Megan, I just want to ask something of Principal Evans. I think that the language here is acceptable for now. I think looking at it for the future, we want to talk about making that change. What I wasn't clear and didn't say is that it's my understanding, and tell me if I'm wrong, that the handbook really needs to be presented to kids and families at the beginning of school. Mm-hmm. So I am not interested, for the sake of a minor change, I would not be interested in not approving this handbook, because in my school district, day one is when that handbook is presented to students, but also sent out to parents. And it would be our next meeting, which would be September 12th. Tell me if that would make trouble for the school. Maybe your school's different, but I think you.
So I don't think it would make any trouble to have the change come later in the school year. I think the change that you're talking about is pretty minor and would not be a major topic of conversation. I don't think.
But if we don't approve the handbook, that's a bigger problem. That's my point.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that we're not going to be able to open. If it's either going to be this or that. Well, it's not. I don't think we need to worry too much about the process. I think I appreciate, Nicole, your statement about the handbook is a handbook, right? And it's not a list of all the best practices necessarily. It's about where the bottom line kind of rests. So that makes sense to me. So I guess that is for you guys to decide. I'm happy to present the language, and then you guys can decide which language you think is best fit.
Megan? And then Superintendent Beninda.
Thank you. I just wanted to reiterate that I completely agree that there's sort of like the handbook and sort of the policy we have, and then there's a list of best practices. And I just want to be really clear that where I'm coming to this issue from and thinking about it is again, switching out all the players, switching out who's in charge, who all of those folks are. How do we make sure that the way the handbook is written, that it is very obvious to students and their families and everyone in our community that we are not, that there is not going to be unfair treatment of typically marginalized or vulnerable groups. You can imagine scenarios, because they're not difficult to imagine and they're real, in other districts where you see a certain type of student being targeted repeatedly for a particular type of situation. There's all sorts of instances where this happens. And I'm not saying it would happen in our district or that it would ever happen. How do we write a policy that ensures that we protect all of the children? And on the flip side of that, that protects administrators from any it's not happening, but someone says, I think they were treating me unfairly because of X, Y, and Z. Well, no, we have this policy written in such a way that it's, we have multiple eyes on it. I don't know. I would like to see, I don't know what the workflow of that is and that part of it, but I would like to see language that just makes sure it's in the policy and the handbook that all students are sort of protected and would be, treated fairly.
Superintendent Benenda?
I just want to say that there's a difference between policy and procedures. And a handbook is basically a policy, and procedures are very different. And the other part I wanted to say is that if you did approve this tonight so we could distribute it to students and families, and you want to work on that language, we can always add a sheet and just send it home in the backpacks to the elementary schools and post it on the website that this is just an addition to the current policy that had been approved by the school committee.
I agree. Anybody else?
I just want to jump in again and say that I totally agree with the concept of what Megan brings up. But that should be noted in every policy at the beginning as well. It's stated clearly by state and federal law, which has other assurances of how that's followed. And it could be that the next person that comes in is hired for the exact reason of that we don't like the current policy or practice. Right. So a practice of using a support team, it might be if anything, right, we want education, like the Thrive Act, we want to see it evolve. Right. I would say MCAS is a little overdue, but okay. But I just, as someone who's had to deal with this, and you change the school support group system and forget to take it out of a policy, not only is it misstating something unintentionally to students and families, but also might set up liability for the district in that policy that says this is supposed to exist here. And all of a sudden it was just, we migrated, or we're doing a pilot with something else. Yet our policy remains saying that we have a student support team. And I don't know, I would, Cindy, the educators, K-12 educators, there used to be things called student intervention teams, student transition teams, that all kind of covered this stuff. And the name philosophy changes as we grow as educators, and the data is analyzed by all of us. So I if you can't tell, I have a kind of a professional, personal, I guess, hangnail around this stuff, around policies talking about practices. Another example is PBIS, right? How many policies did schools have about PBIS? And they would just say PBIS. I don't know how many people on this call know what PBIS is. Probably not a lot. Positive behavioral intervention supports. Right? It's a very complicated clinical-based intervention with students. To put that into a policy doesn't make sense because it is a tool and a support. So I never thought I'd go down this rabbit hole, but it can be misleading by putting that into a policy. And I will leave it at that.
Sam?
I will say, I think one thing about this that is important to Easthampton specifically is that we do kind of historically have an issue in this district in particular with parents and others kind of being aware of what the chain of command is and kind of how to have problems escalated and solved. And so this specific feedback that Laura brought up, I think, kind of recognizes the need in our community to have a little bit more structure and a little bit more transparency around what that looks like. So I would be easy with approving it now and then asking it to be amended. And it looks like I'm probably in good company on that. But I think this is an Easthampton specific change that I think our community needs.
Okay, anybody else? Does someone want to make a motion to accept these handbook changes? Given that we will be looking at this in the future. Does anybody want to make a motion?
I can give a shot to it. Okay, so I move that we approve the handbook as written for the handbook as suggested, with the awareness that new language around this first policy on tardiness will be coming later this year.
I second that.
Was that Laura who seconded? Great. Okay. Any other discussion?
I just don't think, I don't know if
Mary?
that's the type of motion we should make at this moment. I think the motion should be that we're approving this as is so that they can print it and publish it and put it out there. And with the understanding, like you said, that there's additional conversation and discussion that may happen in the future about revisions. I don't think.
Right.
So,
The motion is to accept it. We're just, I think this is reinforcing that we will be looking at this later. But yes, good point. That's a nice clarification. Thank you. So the motion is to approve the handbook with these changes, and it's been seconded. Any other discussion? All right, here we go. Mayor.
Mayor LaChapelle, yes.
Megan?
Megan Harvey, yes.
Maren?
Maren Goldstein, yes.
Sam?
Sam Hunter, yes.
Ben?
Ben Hersey, yes.
Laura?
Laura Scott, yes.
And Cindy Kuzensky, yes. All right. So
Thank
now
you
we have, thank you, Principal Evans. Now we have the Mountain View School handbook.
Hi, everyone. I appreciate all of the work that Bill and his team have talked about tonight around the Easthampton Public Schools Family Handbook. So a little historical information for you. I believe it was back in 2019 where we made some revisions for approval to the Easthampton Family Handbook. And what we discovered was there is some information that is consistent between all of the schools, which is the policy information that Bill has discussed this evening. But there's also information that is school specific. And at the time, we were still in all of our different schools. So there was a piece that stayed consistent from year to year. And then there was a piece that changed within the individual schools. So I'm looking at the two documents, and the document that Bill just discussed is the Easthampton Public Schools Student and Family Handbook. The one that I sent to you this evening is the Mountain View School Student and Family Handbook, which I realized probably has not been reviewed since before we were together in one school. So we were using a handbook that was a Maple handbook, a Center Pepin handbook, and a Whitebrook handbook. So this summer, my team and I sat down together and we revised what was in the Mountain View School handbook that was passed out at the beginning of last year to update it to reflect all of the schools in one. So the first thing that we did was to add the new vision and mission, as well as the guiding principles from our strategic plan. And we also updated a lot of the language that was just outdated and not pertinent to Mountain View School anymore. So I didn't track the changes when we were doing that. The document is probably completely different. So parents and caregivers at the beginning of the year, we've decided that this year we would like to pass out a hard copy, which means paper, of the Mountain View School Student and Family Handbook. And we will be sending an electronic copy of this Easthampton Public Schools Student and Family Handbook, which is the document that you were just talking about in the previous conversation. And parents sign off that they have received and reviewed all of this information. What questions can I answer about what I submitted to you?
I apologize, but I don't see that email, so I don't.
I don't either. Yeah, I don't either. I'm checking again. Now, I don't know if we need you to resend, but I've just been scanning through while I was listening to you, and I
believe it was sent by Sue.
I do not. I have the EHS handbook. I do not have. Does anybody have the Mountain View?
Oh. Yeah, I have the Mountain View handbook.
Yes, it was sent as
Mountain View?
Sent as
yes.
Updated. It's an updated agenda. So there was the original agenda and an updated agenda is the Mountain View.
I have an email with an agenda, an updated agenda, and then two business report and 2 personnel reports, but no Mountain View.
I believe the link. It was a link that Jill sent, and the link is inside that email.
Yeah, it's my SharePoint link.
Mm-hmm.
Now I see it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just say my concern here is that sounds like almost none of us have seen this or looked at it.
It sounds like no one looked at our handbook.
I looked at it. I have a proposal here. What I'm wondering is if we can, if there is a way to kind of table the approval of this until everybody has had a chance to read it, since it looks like there was some confusion.
What I'm concerned.
I also have some questions too, and so I don't know if we can just start by going through that now, if that would be helpful.
Sure. I mean, what I'm concerned about is a lot of it, as Maureen made the distinction before, I think that, in our previous conversation around school policy, you're talking about tardy, you're talking about suspension, you're talking about emergency removal, you're talking about vaping. Those are all scary conversations. And I think by having a Mountain View School handbook, it talks a little bit more about what our specific procedures are. How do you enter school? It talks a little bit about bus transportation. It talks about recess. It talks about snack. It's more Mountain View specific. But also, we have this other piece that includes all of the specific policies and procedures that need to be discussed. So I'm happy to answer any questions about it or suggestions for how to, if we need to add anything to it.
Could you share it and put it on the screen so that we can see those changes?
There isn't any changes tracked though, too. That's the other.
The changes are not tracked.
Okay.
So it's a 17-page document. It's pretty much brand new to everybody in a way.
Yeah.
Can I ask you one question? Jill, you don't hand out paper copies of this handbook, right? You make them digitally available to families. So if we were to make revisions in October or November, those could be very soon made available. I think your concern is having something available to families immediately at the beginning of school.
So a lot of it it just gives parents, especially parents that are new to the district and the school, specifically kindergarten parents. I have not sent it home in paper form in years and years. Right. My team has made the decision this year that we would like to send home a paper copy to Mountain View families for the first time in at least 5 or so years. I will not send the Easthampton Public Schools Student and Family Handbook home in paper form. I will send that electronically. But if we need to hold off on sending it, I don't have to send it home in paper form. But I feel like it's something that people like to have in their desk drawer that they can refer to if they need information about our procedures in school.
I would say, just having read it, and first of all, I want to put out there that, like, I'm a parent of a Mountain View student, and I was so excited that this exists now, because I remember last year being like, wait, I can't find a handbook. There's like a general one. Like, where do I go if I have questions? Like, there's always questions from parents, like, what time does school start? Like,
agreed.
How do I drop my kid off?
Yes.
So I really like having it all in one place. I really like the idea of sending it home. There was some, like, and I'm glad that you've clarified kind of the purpose of it, because there were some, like, pretty big pieces missing that I was looking for, like the way that the policy on suspensions, particularly for students with disabilities. So I kind of was going to ask where that was. And so now it makes sense that this is supposed to kind of be a companion document.
Those items and
I have some more specific questions, but I really like I like where this is going. And I'm just not sure. There's also a random hyperlink somewhere in there that goes to Natick's school website. I don't know why. So I wanted to just kind of go through and kind of ask some questions about, I don't think it's necessarily like ready to go yet, but I really, really like where it's going. I don't know if that's helpful at all.
Where's that?
So my sense is what you would prefer is to send it home and amend it later.
I can send, if approved, I can send it home electronically and then amend it later to send it home in a paper copy. I feel that it's important to eventually send a paper copy home at least every few years. And since we're in a new school, I think it's important that everybody has one. It doesn't need to happen now, but typically those are one of the things that I like to send home in the first day packet.
Yeah, I agree. I like a paper copy so that parents and students can readily just look at it.
I mean, just for logistical information about things like hours, early dismissal, transportation, those kinds of things. Telephone numbers, there's a staff listing in there, the kinds of communications that we use and so forth. I think it's important.
Laura?
So I'm going to propose a compromise. For the record, I did read it. I like where it's going also. Thank you for doing that. And I also support the idea of a paper document, but I think it's difficult. I don't like to ask members to approve something they haven't had time to read, although I don't anticipate there being a lot of requests for revision. I would say we're meeting again on the 12th. If everybody has now located it, if everybody could read it, we could approve. So we could put it out temporarily electronically. If we approve by the 12th, would that give you time to have it published ready at least prior to open house, so that I understand the need for wanting? I think the paper copy is great, especially for the younger level kiddos like we once had.
Sure, I don't see why not. I mean, our open houses toward the end of the month, the 20th and the 21st. Yeah. I don't really see an issue with it. I probably will send the Easthampton Public Schools Student and Family Handbook that you described, that you discussed previously, with all of the policies in it. But a lot of those policies, they don't necessarily pertain to kindergarten families who are just coming through our front door. So I think that this is a little less threatening. It's the reason that we put it together. But equally as important, the policies need to be in place and people need to know about them. So I think it's important to have both.
Superintendent Benenda?
So Just thinking of another idea because we do have to vote on the special ed director. If we could this week, by the end of the week, because she has been in Athens and has not had an opportunity to sign or read her contract, but yet we would need her to be approved to begin school. I didn't know if it was possible just to have a quick Zoom meeting with the school committee at the end of the week, just to approve this document and then also to approve the appointment of the special ed director.
Are you thinking Friday?
Yes.
Can everybody make a Friday meeting?
I can. And that would be fine, right? We could file that as an emergency meeting specifically for the superintendent, so that would be fine.
I can do that.
Would such a meeting meet one of the emergency meeting criteria? I know that's come up in the past. That said, I don't know what all the criteria are, but I remember Cindy.
If Sue filed an agenda tomorrow, then it is an extra meeting with well beyond the 48 hours. So it would not, it would just be an extra meeting. Sue, would you be able to put a short 2-item agenda together for a Friday meeting?
Yes, you need to repeat the day and the time because my internet is lagging and I did not get the day and the time for this meeting.
Right. So we're just working that out, but I just want to make sure that we could do that, and I think we'd be fine. So I'm up for a Friday meeting if that's okay. I'm up for a 5 o'clock, a 6 o'clock. So
6 o'clock is better for me.
6 is better. Okay, so that's Laura and Sam. Maren, can you make a?
Yeah, I can make myself available then. Just back to the handbook. I mean, like there was like a mention of a staff listing. It's not actually listed here, or at least what I'm seeing is not. I mean, there's a page that's for it. I feel like it's not.
The staff.
I guess I'm not seeing this as a finished product ready to be approved.
It's the staff listing is not included because the staff is not complete. So I just didn't want to send it until it was ready to insert that page, which is why I put a place marker there.
Okay.
Okay. So Laura, Sam, Maren, Megan, can you make a 6 on Friday?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Mayor?
Yes, I can too.
Okay. And then Ben?
Yep, I'm good to go.
That's all of us. So great. So 2 items. Discussion and vote on the special ed director and approval of the Mountain View handbook, student and family handbook. So that would be only 2 agenda items for a Friday meeting at 6 o'clock.
Okay, I will do the agenda tomorrow, but please note I am not available on Friday. Sorry.
Okay, thank you for telling us. Megan will take those notes.
Cynthia, I am going to be traveling at that time on Friday, but I'm going to try to phone in from someplace if my assistance is needed with questions.
I think well, the only other choice would be to do it Thursday.
I'm available. I think I have another commitment on Thursday too, unless.
So if you can meet us by phone, even, if you can meet us by phone to answer questions, I think we can still do this.
I can, if I phone into, Maureen or somebody else on this call, I'm happy to do that. I'm going to be on the road.
Yep.
But I can take a call and answer any questions. I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
So, and I do wonder if there's a possibility of having another look at this and sending us a final copy of it. I understand that you're saying you don't want to put the staff list in there quite yet, but like on page or 15 there is a hyperlink to a program at a different school district. It seems like there's some organizational pages on page 13. There's just some pieces that seems like it's not the finished product that we would want to approve and put out at this point. So maybe another look over review of it would be a helpful thing in advance of that meeting too, so that we can actually then approve it.
Okay, I'll take a look at it and resend it. I don't think I see. I'm looking at a hard copy of it, so maybe it has something to do with the formatting of the way that was sent. Maybe it would be more helpful if I sent it as a PDF because
I do think so. I think that would be helpful to see the final product of it, a PDF of it. And again, yeah, it is in the electronic version on the top of page 15 where it says Easthampton Public Schools programs, student one-on-one program. That programs is highlighted in our electronic version and has a Natick Public Schools hyperlink.
Oh, I see what you're talking about. I pulled that in from our technology department. And I believe that is part of our other policy. I just was including that as a separate sign off for our one-to-one agreement. So I believe that's part of the other book as well, but I'm probably going to pull that all the way out of there.
Okay. Great. Thank you for taking a second look at it then.
No problem.
Great. So I think we have a plan of Friday meeting, 6:00, 2 agenda items. You will call and we'll be able to ask you any questions. That'll give us time to look through this and come up with whatever questions, and then we'll get it approved before school starts.
Sounds great.
That's a good idea. Thank you, everybody. All right. So we will do that. So that concludes our regular items. Our next regular meetings are September 12th. And Mayor?
Could I just add 2 important events that are coming up in town?
Sure.
So on Monday, the 28th at 5:30 to 8 p.m., we have the Easthampton opioid remembrance ceremony and info fair. So everyone in the community is invited to come. There's a rain date of the 29th. Also, the community night out celebration, the 40th year anniversary, and this is kind of an evolution of Cookout with a Cop. We've joined many more city departments into this and are celebrating and recognizing the National Community Night Out. The new date will be August 30th, 5 to 8 p.m. due to the rain expected on Thursday of this week. So there'll still be the traditional cookout as well as a lot of other activities. And that's Wednesday on the 30th, and that's at 50 Payson. Going back to the 28th, that's Easthampton's opioid awareness night, and that's at Millside Park at 5:30.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Those are great. So we don't have an other, but I just want to make sure there's nothing anybody else needs to cover before we talk about our next meetings. And then I have to announce that we're going to go into executive session. So we good? All right. So our next meetings are September 12th, October 10th, October 24th, November 14th, and December 12th. Starting, it is our hope that starting September 12th, we will be doing in-person hybrid meetings at 50 Payson. So I will be scheduling a little training session for Megan and myself, and perhaps Maren might want to do that for any other future meetings that we're going to have. And it will just be a training, hopefully, with President Gomez to make sure that we can get it up and running on our own. because the last 2 times we did in-person meetings, he got them going, and they worked great. But we didn't set them up, and we need to be able to do that.
If it's all right, I'd love to go to that training session too, just so that there's more people.
I think it would be great if all of us watched and learned. So our hope is that we're going to get that done. I'll be contacting President Gomez and trying to schedule that so that September 12th will be hybrid. Now, we have to go into an executive session pursuant to MGL 30A as 21A3 to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the Easthampton Education Association. Teachers, if an open meeting may have detrimental effect on bargaining position of the public body, and the chair so declares. So we will be roll calling into executive session. We will adjourn from executive session. We will not be returning. Okay? So we are going to roll call into executive session. Mayor?
Yes.
Megan?
Megan Harvey, yes.
Maren?
Maren Goldstein, yes.
Sam?
Sam Hunter, yes.
Ben?
Ben Hersey, yes.
Laura?
Laura Scott, yes.
And Cindy Kuzensky, yes. Okay, so we're moving into executive session. Good night, everybody. And remember, we are going to be adjourning from that that executive session. So have a good night. Thank you.
This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.